The air hung heavy, thick with forced cheer and desperation. Christmas in prison. It was a bizarre spectacle, like a candy cane dipped in despair. The walls, usually cold and imposing, were now haphazardly decorated. Paper chains, crafted from old magazines, hung limply. Hand-drawn snowflakes taped askew. Even the guards seemed affected. Their usual gruff demeanor softened slightly. A forced smile here, a mumbled carol there. But beneath the facade, the reality lingered. This was still prison. A concrete jungle where hope went to die. The holidays just amplified the feeling, the absence of loved ones, the longing for freedom. It was a constant ache, a dull throb in the soul, and it was about to get a whole lot worse because this Christmas something was different. A plan was brewing, a storm gathering in the hearts of those who had nothing left to lose.
There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a tension that hummed beneath the surface. In the cafeteria, whispers replaced the usual clatter. Eyes darted back and forth. Something was brewing. Red, a lifer, sat hunched over a chessboard. His opponent, Mouse, barely made eye contact. Red was the mastermind. Across the room, Big Tony stirred her coffee. Tony wasn't afraid of anyone, but even she seemed on edge. Her loyalty was now a dangerous game. Then there was Jimmy the Weasel. A scrawny man with shifty eyes, Jimmy was the wild card. This trio was about to turn the prison inside out. Their target, the commissary. Their motive, a Christmas they wouldn't forget. The commissary, a beacon of hope in a desolate world. A place where, for a brief moment, inmates could forget where they were. A Snickers bar, a bag of chips, luxuries that tasted like freedom. But this year, the shelves were practically bare. Budget cuts, the guards called it, austerity measures. But to the inmates, it felt like a slap in the face, another reminder of what they'd lost. The whispers started subtly, a murmur here, a hushed conversation there. Word spread like wildfire through the cell blocks. Someone was going to do something. Someone was going to fight back. The tension was a living thing. It crackled in the air, in the guarded glances, in the hushed tones. The prison, usually a place of simmering resentment, felt like a powder keg, and the fuse had just been lit. Red wasn't always a lifer. He used to believe in second chances. Before the system chewed him up and spat him out, he had a wife, a son, a life outside these walls, a bad hand in a poker game, a debt that spiraled out of control. One stupid mistake, that's all it took. Now, his son was a man. Red had missed his wedding, his grandson's birth, years stolen, replaced with concrete and steel. Christmas was the hardest, the memories too vivid, the pain too raw. But this year, something had shifted. A fire ignited in his gut, not for himself, but for them, the forgotten, the hopeless. They deserved a Christmas miracle. Red knew the risks. Failure wasn't an option. This heist, it wasn't about greed. It was about redemption. A chance to right a wrong, to leave a legacy, to give something back to the world that had taken everything from him. Big Tony had always been a survivor. Foster homes, group shelters, the streets. She knew hardship like the back of her hand. Prison was just another cage, another challenge to overcome. Her booming laugh was a defense mechanism, a way to keep the darkness at bay. But behind the tough exterior was a heart of gold. She looked out for the weak, the vulnerable. They reminded her of herself. This Christmas, the commissary cuts hit Tony hard, not for herself, but for the young ones. The kids doing time for petty crimes. They still had hope in their eyes, hope that she was determined to protect. When Red approached her, a plan forming in his eyes, Tony didn't hesitate. She knew the risks, felt the fear in her gut, but she also saw a chance to make a difference, to bring a little joy to a place that had forgotten its meaning. Jimmy the Weasel wasn't cut out for prison life. He was a small-time crook, a petty thief with a gambling problem and a knack for making bad decisions. He was in over his head, and everyone knew it. He owed money, a lot of money, to the wrong people, people who wouldn't think twice about making him disappear. Christmas meant nothing to him, just another day closer to his debt coming due. When Red came calling, a lifeline thrown into his despair, Jimmy saw a way out, a dangerous, reckless way out. But what choice did he have? Red promised protection, a clean slate. All he had to do was his part. A simple task, Red had said. But nothing about this felt simple. Fear gnawed at Jimmy's insides. He was in too deep, and there was no turning back. The prison yard was their sanctuary, a place of relative freedom where whispers could go unnoticed amidst the shouts and laughter. It was here, under the watchful eyes of the guards, that Red laid out his plan. Tony listened intently, her expression unreadable. Jimmy, pale and fidgety, looked ready to bolt. Red, his voice low and steady, spoke of diversions, of decoys, of exploiting the holiday chaos to their advantage. The commissary was their target, but not the goods themselves. No, Red had something bigger in mind. Something that would send a message. Something that would give the inmates a Christmas they wouldn't forget. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. But as Red spoke, his words weaving a tapestry of hope and rebellion, Tony felt a surge of adrenaline. Even Jimmy, despite his fear, couldn't help but be drawn in. This wasn't just about stealing snacks anymore. This was about taking a stand. The prison library, a sanctuary of sorts, became their war room. Red, hunched over a chessboard, used pawns and rooks to represent guards. The air was thick with the scent of old books. The key, Red muttered, is timing. He tapped a finger on the chessboard. The Christmas Eve movie night. That's our window. Tony nodded slowly. Most guards will be in the warden's office. Jimmy nervously chewed his fingernails. And what about the ones who aren't? What about Jones? He never misses a patrol. Red's lips curled into a cold smile. Don't worry about Jones. We have someone looking after him. His words hung in the air. The kitchen, the heart of the prison where gossip spread faster than cockroaches. Tiny ruled with a ladle and a scowl. He was their inside man. Tiny wasn't a bad guy. A DUI on Christmas Eve cost him everything. He hated the system, but mostly seeing inmates suffer. Red promised him a cut to see his daughter again. Tiny was desperate. He slipped Red information, his loyalty bought with hope. He was a crucial cog in Red's plan. He spiked the Christmas punch with sleeping pills. Tiny was playing to win, for a chance at a different kind of Christmas miracle. The plan was audacious, relying on precision and a healthy dose of chaos. While the guards were distracted by sugar plums and holiday cheer, Red and his crew would move through the shadows, ghosts in the prison's underbelly. Tony, her strength legendary within the prison walls, would disable the security cameras, creating blind spots for their operation. She'd fashioned a makeshift toolkit from toothbrushes, paper clips, and stolen electrical tape, her ingenuity born of necessity. Jimmy, despite his nerves, was crucial. His nimbleness, his ability to slip through cracks and crevices unnoticed, made him the perfect infiltrator. He was tasked with creating a diversion, a series of small fires and false alarms to draw the guards away from the commissary. Every detail had been considered, every eventuality accounted for. They were a team, united by desperation and a shared desire for a taste of freedom, even if it was just the freedom to choose what they consumed on Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve dawned cold and clear, the air electric with anticipation. The prison buzzed with a nervous energy, a collective holding of breath as inmates went about their routines, their eyes darting to Red and his crew whenever they passed. In the laundry room, amidst the steam and the smell of bleach, the final preparations were underway. Prison jumpsuits were modified, transformed into makeshift Santa costumes. The irony wasn't lost on them. Who would have thought, Tony chuckled, her voice husky, that we'd be spending Christmas Eve dressed as jolly old Saint Nick? She adjusted her fake beard, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of amusement and steely determination. Red, his face hidden behind a cotton ball beard, smiled grimly. "This isn't about Santa Claus, Tony," he said, his voice low and serious. "This is about taking back what's ours. This is about sending a message." As the sun began its final descent, casting long shadows across the prison yard, a hush fell over the cell blocks. The Christmas Eve movie night had begun, the tinny sound of carols and forced laughter echoing from the warden's office. Red gathered his team, his eyes scanning their faces, searching for any sign of hesitation. Tony stood tall, her expression resolute. Jimmy, pale and trembling, looked as if he might be sick, but he stood his ground. "Remember," Red said, his voice barely a whisper, "we're in this together. We stick to the plan, we get out clean, no one gets hurt." He paused, his gaze steady. "Tonight we're not inmates. We're something more. We're hope." And with that, they melted into the shadows, their Santa costumes grotesque parodies of holiday cheer in the dimly lit prison corridors. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the pounding of their hearts and the distant echo of Christmas carols. The heist had begun. The prison, draped in shadows and forced holiday cheer, held its breath. Red, Tony, and Jimmy moved like phantoms through the deserted corridors. The faint jingle of keys was the only sound. The commissary door loomed, a barrier between them and their target. Tony produced bolt cutters, their handles wrapped in cloth. Each snip was a hammer blow against the silence. Inside, the commissary was a treasure trove of forbidden delights. Shelves stacked high with ramen noodles, chips, candy bars. A cruel reminder of their confinement. "Jimmy," Red whispered, "get to work on those security cameras. Tony, with me." They moved with practiced efficiency, fueled by a shared sense of purpose. This wasn't just about snacks, it was about justice. Jimmy, armed with Tiny's intel and a bag full of distractions, darted through the corridors like a shadow, his heart hammering against his ribs. He placed a small, smoldering pile of rags near the warden's office, the acrid smell of smoke adding to the tension. He could hear the faint strains of jingle bells from inside, the forced merriment grating on his nerves. He slipped a playing card, the Queen of Hearts, under the office door, a calling card, a silent taunt. Back in the commissary, Red and Tony worked quickly, filling duffel bags with their bounty. But Red wasn't indiscriminate. He bypassed the most expensive items, focusing on the essentials: toothpaste, soap, ramen, instant coffee. "We're not stealing for ourselves," he reminded Tony, his voice a low growl. "This is about giving everyone a taste of Christmas." Tony, her respect for Red growing with every passing minute, nodded in agreement. They were Robin Hood and Maid Marian, stealing from the system to feed the forgotten. A sudden clang, metal on metal, echoed through the corridor. Red froze, his heart plummeting to his stomach. "What was that?" he hissed, his eyes scanning the shadows. Tony, her hand instinctively reaching for the makeshift weapon tucked into her waistband, shook her head. "Don't know," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. But it came from the cell block. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the adrenaline that had been fueling them. The plan was unraveling, and they were trapped in the belly of the beast. A high-pitched scream, laced with terror, cut through the silence. It was Mouse, his voice unmistakable. Red exchanged a look with Tony, a silent conversation passing between them. They had to act, had to do something. "We can't leave him," Red said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hand. "Tony, you get the bags back to the library. I'll handle this." Tony hesitated, her loyalty warring with her common sense. But Red was already gone, disappearing into the darkness. Red moved swiftly, his years in prison honing his senses, teaching him to navigate the shadows. He found Mouse huddled in the corner of the cell block, his face pale and streaked with tears. Two hulking figures, Jones's enforcers, loomed over him. "What's going on here?" Red demanded, his voice a low growl. The enforcers turned, their faces twisted into cruel sneers. "Just teaching this little rat a lesson," one of them grunted, brandishing a shiv. "Seems he gambled away something he didn't own." Red, his eyes cold and calculating, sized up the situation. He was outnumbered, outgunned, but he had one thing on his side: desperation. He flung a duffel bag at the enforcer's feet, its contents spilling across the floor. "Here," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "take what you want. Just leave the kid alone." The enforcers hesitated, their eyes flickering between Red and the unexpected bounty at their feet. Hope, fragile and unexpected, bloomed in the darkness. The alarm blared, a deafening shriek that signaled the end of their operation. Tony, her arms laden with duffel bags, made it back to the library just as the lights flickered on, plunging the prison into chaos. Jimmy, his face white as a sheet, was waiting for her, his eyes wide with panic. "Red! Where's Red?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Tony, her heart pounding against her ribs, shook her head. "He stayed behind," she said, her voice tight, "to buy us some time." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor, accompanied by the shouts of guards. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before they were discovered. Tony grabbed Jimmy's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "We have to go," she urged, her voice low and urgent. "We have to get this stuff to Tiny. He'll know what to do." Jimmy hesitated, his gaze fixed on the library door, as if he expected Red to magically appear. But Red wasn't coming. The choice, stark and unforgiving, had been made. The cell block was a cacophony of clanging metal, barked orders, and panicked whispers. The sudden illumination of the prison, usually a gradual shift from dim to dimmer, was jarring. It felt like an interrogation lamp exposing their vulnerability. Inmates, roused from their bunks or interrupted mid-card game, exchanged uneasy glances. The air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the usual prison anxieties. This was different. This was fear laced with anticipation. The guards, faces flushed with a mixture of anger and confusion, were a whirlwind of activity. They swarmed through the corridors, their radios crackling with static and threats. The Christmas spirit had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard reality. The silence from the commissary was deafening. No triumphant shouts, no celebratory whoops, just an unsettling quiet that spoke volumes. Something had gone wrong. Everyone felt it. The commissary door hung open, a mangled testament to Tony's handiwork. Inside, the scene was one of calculated chaos. Shelves were half empty, their contents scattered across the floor, a testament to the hurried raid. Warden Thompson, his face a mask of barely suppressed rage, surveyed the scene, his jowls quivering with indignation. His Christmas Eve had taken a decidedly unpleasant turn. "Find them!" he roared, his voice echoing off the bare walls. "Find those sons of bitches!" The guards, fueled by the promise of overtime pay and a chance to unleash their pent-up frustrations, didn't need to be told twice. They fanned out through the prison, their eyes scanning every shadow, every nook and cranny. The discovery of Mouse, unconscious and bound with duct tape, added fuel to the fire. The enforcers, stripped of their ill-gotten gains and nursing bruised egos, pointed accusing fingers at Red. The hunt was on. News of the heist, like wildfire through dry brush, spread through the prison grapevine. In hushed tones behind cupped hands, inmates shared what little they knew. Fear mingled with a grudging admiration, the audacity of it all. To strike at the heart of the prison on Christmas Eve. It was madness, it was brilliant, it was hope, however fleeting, in a place that had forgotten its meaning. The guards, their initial fury giving way to a grudging respect, were baffled. The meticulous planning, the execution, this wasn't the work of petty thieves. This was something more, something organized, something rebellious. The inmates, even those who had nothing to do with the heist, felt a surge of solidarity. For one night, they were united against a common enemy. The system, the warden, the crushing weight of their confinement. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear. The usual forced cheer of the holiday season was absent, replaced by a palpable tension. The prison yard, usually a cacophony of laughter and shouted greetings, was eerily silent. The guards, their faces grim, watched the inmates with suspicion. But beneath their scrutiny, a silent conversation passed between the prisoners. A shared nod, a knowing glance. The heist had failed, but something had shifted. In the solitary confinement block, Red sat on his bunk, a thin blanket pulled tight against the December chill. He was bruised, battered, but his spirit remained unbroken. He had bought his fellow inmates a Christmas miracle, a flicker of hope in the darkness. And in the hearts of the inmates, a seed had been planted. A seed of rebellion. A seed that whispered of a different kind of Christmas future. A future where they were not just inmates, but a community. A community that, despite the odds, dared to hope for something more. The prison yard was a sea of gray. Gray uniforms, gray walls, gray sky. The Christmas football game was canceled. Warden Thompson ensured it. Christmas was for the law-abiding. Red sat in solitary, hoping for a miracle, a decent meal, a stolen candy bar. Even here, hope could bloom. His body ached, but his heart hurt more. The plan had failed. Tony and Jimmy were caught. They would be punished. He'd given them hope, only to see it crushed. Was it worth it? The prison cafeteria was silent. No clinking trays, no whispered conversations, just the scrape of spoons against metal bowls and the watchful gaze of the guards. Christmas dinner, dry turkey, watery gravy, instant mashed potatoes. A feast fit for a king, prison style. But something was different. A subtle shift in the atmosphere. A shared defiance in the set of shoulders, the glint in downcast eyes. The inmates ate slowly, deliberately, squeezing every drop of flavor, every ounce of satisfaction from the meager fare. A cough, a clearing of the throat, and then a voice, low but clear, started humming. Silent Night. The hum spread, hesitant at first, then gaining strength until the entire cafeteria resonated with the sound. The guards, caught off guard by this unexpected display of unity, hesitated. This wasn't in the rule book. This silent protest, this shared defiance disguised as a Christmas carol. It was more powerful than any riot, any act of violence. Red, in his solitary cell, heard the faint echo of the carol. A smile touched his lips. He may be locked up, but they weren't broken. They hadn't lost hope. This Christmas, they'd found something more valuable. They'd found their voice. Make sure to like and subscribe for content.